The first gunshot split the night air like thunder, sending a flock of startled birds scattering into the darkening sky above Alta, Utah. Willow Armstrong pressed her back against the rough-hewn wall of the Golden Spur Saloon, her heart hammering against her ribs as the sound of rowdy laughter and breaking glass filtered through the swinging doors. It was June 1876, and the mining town of Alta was experiencing a silver boom that drew prospectors, gamblers, and troublemakers from across the territory. The town had sprung up almost overnight, nestled in the shadow of the Wasatch Mountains, with a single dusty main street lined with hastily constructed wooden buildings. The Golden Spur Saloon stood at the center, its painted facade and piano music a beacon for miners looking to spend their hard-earned silver. Willow had arrived in Alta just 2 weeks earlier, accepting a position as the schoolteacher for the handful of families that had put down roots in the booming town. At 22, she'd left behind her comfortable life in Boston, driven by a desire for adventure and independence that had horrified her parents. With her chestnut hair pinned neatly beneath her bonnet and her simple blue dress covered by a practical shawl, she'd planned to quickly purchase supplies and return to her small cabin on the edge of town before nightfall. That plan had dissolved the moment 3 drunken miners had spotted her entering the general store attached to the saloon. "Well now, ain't you a pretty little thing?" one of them had slurred, blocking her path as she attempted to leave with her packages. "Why don't you come have a drink with old Charlie?" "No thank you, sir," Willow had replied firmly, attempting to sidestep the man. "I need to be getting home." But Charlie and his companions had other ideas, herding her through the connecting door into the saloon itself, their alcohol-fueled determination overcoming her protests. Now she stood cornered near the bar, the 3 men forming a half-circle around her as the other patrons either ignored the scene or watched with detached amusement. The bartender, a portly man with a handlebar mustache, merely shrugged when she caught his eye, clearly unwilling to intervene. "I said I'm not interested in a drink," Willow repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please let me pass." Charlie, a barrel-chested man with a week's worth of stubble and bloodshot eyes, grinned widely. "One drink ain't gonna hurt you, schoolmarm, might even loosen you up a bit." His companions laughed, one of them reaching out to touch her hair. Willow slapped his hand away, which only seemed to amuse them more. "Do not touch me," she said, her Boston accent becoming more pronounced in her anger. "Oh, listen to that fancy talk," the shortest of the 3 men snickered, adjusting his filthy hat. "Think you're better than us, do ya?" The tallest miner, a man with a jagged scar running down one cheek, moved closer. "Maybe she needs to learn some manners, boys. New in town like her should know how to be friendly." Panic began to rise in Willow's throat. The few other women in the saloon were working girls who paid her no mind, and the male patrons seemed content to let the scene unfold without interference. Her hand instinctively moved to her reticule, where she carried a small derringer her father had insisted she take west with her. But she knew pulling it would only escalate the situation. The swing doors of the saloon suddenly banged open, and the noisy room fell momentarily quiet. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the dying light of sunset, dust from the street swirling around his boots. As he stepped forward into the lamplight, Willow could make out a man in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a storm-dark sky. A star-shaped badge glinted on his vest, partially covered by a long duster coat. His hand rested casually on the holster at his hip, but there was nothing casual about the way his gaze immediately assessed the situation. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice low and measured. Charlie turned, swaying slightly from the whiskey. "Ain't none of your business, Logan. Just having a friendly chat with the new schoolteacher." The newcomer's eyes found Willow's, noting her cornered position and rigid posture. Without breaking that gaze, he spoke again. "Seems the lady doesn't find your company too agreeable, Charlie." "She ain't said so," the miner with the scar argued, though he'd taken a small step back from the lawman's steady stare. The tall man moved forward with unhurried confidence until he stood just a few feet from the group. She doesn't need to. He looked at Willow again, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. She's with me. The simple declaration hung in the air, and Willow felt a curious mix of relief and confusion. She didn't know this man, but something in his stance and the calm authority in his voice made her trust him instinctively. Charlie laughed, though it sounded forced. Since when does Sheriff Logan Zephyr take up with schoolteachers? Thought you were too busy chasing outlaws to chase skirts. Sheriff Zephyr's expression didn't change, but Willow noticed his hand shifting subtly closer to his gun. I'd watch your tongue, Charlie. Miss Armstrong here is under my protection. Now, why don't you and your friends find somewhere else to be? The standoff lasted only seconds, but to Willow it felt like hours. Finally, Charlie spat on the floor near the sheriff's boots. Come on, boys, plenty of friendlier ladies in this establishment anyway. He shot Willow a resentful glare as he shouldered past, his companions following with similar looks of drunken disappointment. When they'd moved to the far side of the saloon, Sheriff Zephyr turned to Willow. Are you all right, Miss Armstrong? She nodded, finally releasing the breath she'd been holding. Yes, thank you. She straightened her shawl, trying to regain her composure. I didn't expect, that is, I just came to purchase supplies. I didn't intend to enter the saloon at all. The general store closes early on Saturdays, he explained. Hank Thompson runs both businesses, not the safest arrangement for a lady, but that's Alta for you. He glanced at her packages on the floor where she dropped them. May I help you carry those home? It's getting dark. Willow hesitated. Proper Boston etiquette would never allow her to accept an escort from a man she'd just met, but this wasn't Boston. That would be most appreciated, Sheriff Zephyr. He picked up her packages with ease. Logan, he corrected gently. Everyone just calls me Logan. As they made their way to the saloon doors, the bartender called out, Hey, Sheriff, you want your usual tonight? Logan shook his head. Not tonight, Hank. Make sure those three don't cause any more trouble, or I'll have them in cells till they sober up. The night air was cool against Willow's flushed cheeks as they stepped onto the wooden sidewalk that fronted the saloon. The main street of Alta stretched before them, illuminated by oil lamps hanging outside the various establishments. A few horses stood hitched to posts, and down the street she could see the silhouette of the small church where she taught school during the week. Where are you staying? Logan asked, falling into step beside her. Mr. and Mrs. Perkins rented me a cabin behind their property, she replied. It's just past the blacksmith shop near the edge of town, Logan nodded. I know the place. It's a fair walk from here. They proceeded in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the distant piano from the saloon and the soft crunch of their boots on the dirt road. Willow stole a glance at her companion, noting the way he continuously scanned their surroundings, alert despite his outwardly relaxed demeanor. I should thank you properly, she said at last. Those men wouldn't leave me alone, and no one else seemed inclined to help. Logan's mouth tightened slightly. Alta's still finding its footing as a proper town. We've got families moving in, a church, your school, but the mines bring in all types and not all of them respect the law. He looked down at her. How long have you been in town? 2 weeks tomorrow, Willow answered. The territory governor arranged for teachers to be sent to the new settlements. I volunteered. A slight smile touched his lips. All the way from back east by the sound of your accent. Boston? Yes, she was surprised he could place it so accurately. Is it that obvious? I spent some time in Massachusetts years ago, he explained, his voice containing a hint of something she couldn't quite identify, regret, perhaps. Your accent brings back memories. They turned down a narrower side street, moving away from the bustle of the town center. The modest homes here belonged to the more established residents, the blacksmith, the doctor, and a few successful merchants. If I may ask, Sheriff, Logan, Willow began cautiously, what did you mean when you said I was with you? I appreciate the intervention, but... He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the dim light from a nearby window, she could see his expression was serious. It was the quickest way to get them to back down without causing a scene. Men like Charlie respect few things, but another man's claim is one of them. His voice softened. I apologize if it made you uncomfortable. No, she said quickly. It was resourceful. I'm grateful. Logan nodded and resumed walking. You should be careful about going to the general store in the evenings. Morning is better, fewer minors around, and Hank's usually sober enough to mind the store properly. I'll remember that, Willow promised. Though I'm not one to hide away from difficulties, I came west to be independent, not to cower. This drew a genuine chuckle from him. I can see that. Takes courage to leave Boston for a place like Alta. Most women who come here either have husbands or are looking for them. I'm neither, Willow said firmly. I came to teach, not to find a husband. They reached a small but well-maintained cabin set back from the road, with a neat garden patch and a fresh coat of whitewash. A lantern had been lit and hung by the door Mrs. Perkins's doing, no doubt, thoughtfully ensuring Willow wouldn't return to a dark home. This is me, Willow said, stopping at the gate in the low fence surrounding the property. Logan handed her the packages. Get inside and lock your door. Alta's generally safe, but it never hurts to be cautious. Their hands brushed as she took the bundles, and Willow felt an unexpected warmth spread through her fingers. Thank you again, Sheriff. I'm in your debt. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. No debt, he said quietly. Just doing my job. He tipped his hat and stepped back. Good night, Miss Armstrong. Good night, she replied, watching as he turned and headed back toward the main street, his tall figure soon swallowed by the gathering darkness. Inside her small cabin, Willow lit a lamp and set her packages on the table. Her hands were still trembling slightly, whether from the encounter at the saloon or the unexpected rescue, she couldn't say. She moved to the window, peering out at the night, but Logan Zephyr had already disappeared from view. With a sigh, she began unpacking her supplies, paper and pencils for her students, coffee, sugar, and a small bottle of rose-scented soap that had been her one indulgence. As she worked, her mind kept returning to the sheriff's steady gaze and the confident way he'd claimed her as his companion, if only as a ruse. He was just doing his job, she reminded herself aloud, trying to dispel the strange flutter in her chest when she recalled his voice. Alta was a small town, and she would likely see him again, but Willow Armstrong hadn't come west to be distracted by a handsome lawman. She had a position to establish, children to teach, and a life of her own to build. Still, as she prepared for bed, she found herself wondering what memories of Boston Logan Zephyr carried, and why a man with such educated speech and manners had ended up as sheriff in a rough mining town in the Utah Territory. Morning came with the crisp clarity of mountain air and golden sunlight streaming through Willow's small window. She rose early, as was her habit, washing her face in the basin and pinning her hair into its usual neat arrangement. Sunday meant church service, the one day when most of Alta's respectable citizens gathered together, miners and merchants alike putting aside their work to at least make a show of piety. She chose her best dress, a deep green cotton with modest lace trim, and topped it with a matching bonnet. The walk to the church took only 10 minutes, and she arrived to find several families already gathering on the simple wooden steps. Miss Armstrong, a small voice called out, and 8-year-old Eliza Thompson, the general store owner's daughter, came running up to her. Pa says you had trouble at the store yesterday. Are you all right? Willow smiled, patting the girl's shoulder. Perfectly fine, thank you, Eliza. Your father needn't worry. It wasn't Pa who was worried, the girl confided. Sheriff Zephyr came by early this morning and gave Pa an earful about letting those miners bother you. Pa says the sheriff ain't never spoken so stern to him before. This news caused an unexpected flutter in Willow's stomach. I see, she said carefully. Well, it was all resolved with no harm done. Mrs. Perkins, Willow's landlady, approached then, a knowing look in her eye. Good morning, Willow. I hear Sheriff Zephyr escorted you home last night. Very gallant of him. He was simply performing his duty, Willow replied, feeling a blush creep up her neck. Nothing more. If you say so, dear, Mrs. Perkins said, not bothering to hide her smile. Though I should mention that in the 3 years Logan Zephyr has been sheriff here, I've never known him to personally escort any woman home, no matter the circumstances. Before Willow could formulate a response, the church bell began to ring, calling the congregation inside. She followed the others into the simple wooden structure, sliding into a pew near the back. The church was filling quickly, a testament to the growing population of Alta. Miners in their Sunday best sat alongside merchants and their families, everyone putting aside social distinctions for at least this 1 hour of the week. As the reverend moved to the pulpit to begin the service, the door at the back of the church opened once more. Willow didn't need to turn to know who had entered. Something in the sudden straightening of postures around her told her it was Logan. She kept her eyes forward, though she was acutely aware when he took a seat in the very last pew, several rows behind her. The service proceeded as usual, with hymns and a sermon about the virtues of community and forbearance. Willow sang along and bowed her head for prayers, but her thoughts kept straying to the man sitting behind her. Why had he confronted Mr. Thompson about yesterday's incident? Was he truly concerned for her welfare, or simply enforcing proper behavior in his town? When the service ended, people filed out slowly, stopping to chat on the church steps. Willow found herself surrounded by the mothers of her students, all eager to discuss their children's progress or the upcoming end of term recitation. She answered their questions patiently, but couldn't help scanning the dispersing crowd for a glimpse of the sheriff. She spotted him finally, standing a little apart, deep in conversation with a man she recognized as one of the mining company supervisors. Logan was dressed more formally than the previous evening, in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his badge polished to a shine. His gun belt was still present, however, a reminder that even on the Lord's Day, the law in Alta required constant vigilance. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up suddenly, his eyes meeting hers across the churchyard. For a moment, neither of them looked away, and Willow felt that same inexplicable connection she'd experienced the night before. Then Mrs. Thompson asked her a question about Eliza's reading skills, and she was forced to turn her attention back to the conversation at hand. By the time she finished speaking with the parents, Logan had disappeared. Willow told herself she wasn't disappointed as she began the walk back to her cabin. Sunday was her day to write letters home and prepare lessons for the coming week, and she had plenty to occupy her mind without dwelling on Sheriff Zephyr. She had just reached her gate when she heard hoofbeats approaching from behind. Turning, she saw Logan riding toward her on a magnificent chestnut gelding, the animal's coat gleaming in the midday sun. "Miss Armstrong," he called, slowing his horse to a walk as he neared her. "I hope your morning has been peaceful." "Very much so, thank you," she replied, shading her eyes with one hand as she looked up at him. "I understand I have you to thank for speaking to Mr. Thompson about yesterday's incident." A fleeting look of embarrassment crossed his face. News travels fast in Alta. "I merely reminded Hank of his responsibilities as a business owner. Nevertheless, I appreciate your concern." She hesitated, then added, "Would you care to join me for coffee? It's the least I can offer in return for your assistance yesterday." For a moment she thought he might refuse, a shadow of something like caution crossing his features. Then he nodded, swinging down from his saddle with a fluid grace that spoke of years spent on horseback. "I'd be honored," he said, tying his horse to her fence post. "Though I warn you, the townspeople will be talking by supper time." Willow squared her shoulders. "Let them talk. I'm not so fragile that I fear a bit of gossip." This drew a smile from him, transforming his serious face into something altogether more approachable. "I'm beginning to see that, Miss Armstrong." Inside her cabin, Willow busied herself with the coffee pot while Logan stood somewhat awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. The small space seemed even smaller with his tall frame occupying it, and she was suddenly conscious of the propriety of having a man in her home without a chaperone. In Boston, such a thing would be scandalous, but here in Alta, different rules applied. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs at her small table. "And you must call me Willow if we're to be friends." He took the offered seat, placing his hat on the table. "Friends, is it? I wasn't sure you'd want any connection with the law after yesterday's troubles." "On the contrary," she replied, setting 2 cups on the table and filling them with the steaming coffee. "I find I'm grateful to know there's someone in Alta who upholds order." She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "And I suspect there's more to Sheriff Logan Zephyr than meets the eye." He took a sip of his coffee, regarding her over the rim of the cup. "What makes you say that? Your speech, for one thing. Your educated college, I'd guess. And you recognized my Boston accent because you've spent time there, not just passing through." She tilted her head slightly. "I wonder what brings a man like you to a place like Alta." A hint of admiration flickered in his eyes. "You're observant. Most people don't look past the badge and the gun." "I'm a teacher," she reminded him. "Observation is part of my profession," he nodded, conceding the point. "I did attend college Harvard Law as a matter of fact, practiced in Boston for a few years before the war." "The war," Willow echoed, surprised. "You fought Union Army," he confirmed. "Afterward, I couldn't settle back into city life. Headed west, worked as a U.S. Marshal for a while, then took this post when Alta started booming." He shrugged, as if dismissing the significance of his journey. "What about you? What brings a proper Boston lady to teach in a mining town?" Willow gazed into her coffee cup, considering how much to share. "I wanted something different," she said finally. "My parents expected me to marry well and settle into the same life they've led, but I've always been restless. Teaching gave me purpose, and when I heard about positions available in the Western Territories, it seemed like an opportunity for adventure." "And has it lived up to your expectations?" Logan asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Even with drunken miners and saloon mishaps?" She laughed softly. "Perhaps especially because of those things. Boston was safe, predictable. Here I feel alive." She met his gaze directly. "I feel as though I'm becoming who I was meant to be, rather than who my parents expected me to be." Something shifted in Logan's expression, a recognition or understanding. "That's a rare gift, Willow, knowing your own mind so clearly." "And you?" she asked quietly. "Have you found what you were looking for out west?" He was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I found purpose," he said finally. "The law is simpler here, in some ways more direct. A man either breaks it or he doesn't, in Boston with all its politics and social hierarchies." He shook his head. "But I won't pretend there aren't days when I miss certain comforts of civilization." "Like what?" Willow prompted, genuinely curious. "Books," he answered immediately. "Good conversation, music that doesn't come from a saloon piano." His mouth curved into a half smile. "Restaurants where the main offering isn't beans and salt pork." Willow laughed, the sound bright in the small cabin. "I've noticed the culinary limitations of Alta myself, though Mrs. Perkins does make an excellent apple pie when she can get the fruit." Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from books they'd both read to their respective journeys west. Logan described the breathtaking landscapes he'd crossed as a marshal, while Willow shared amusing anecdotes about her students. Before either realized it, the afternoon had slipped away, shadows lengthening across the cabin floor. "I should go," Logan said finally, noticing the changed light. "I've taken up your entire Sunday." "I've enjoyed the company," Willow assured him, rising to take their cups to the basin. Logan stood as well, reaching for his hat. "Thank you for the coffee and the conversation. Both were refreshing." There was a moment of awkward silence as they stood facing each other in the small space. Willow was acutely aware of how close he stood, close enough that she could detect the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "Perhaps we could do this again sometime," she suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. "I have books you might enjoy borrowing." His eyes warmed. "I'd like that." He placed his hat on his head, adjusting it with a practiced motion. "Until then, Miss Armstrong, Willow, stay out of trouble." She walked him to the door, watching as he untied his horse and swung easily into the saddle. "I make no promises, Sheriff," she called as he turned his mount toward town. "Trouble seems to find me without much effort on my part." His laughter drifted back to her on the breeze, and she stood at her gate until horse and rider disappeared from view, her heart lighter than it had been since her arrival in Alta. The following weeks established a pattern that became the quiet talk of Alta. Every Sunday after church, Sheriff Logan Zephyr could be seen riding his chestnut gelding to Willow Armstrong's cabin, where he would spend several hours before returning to his duties. Sometimes they were spotted walking together along the creek that ran behind the town, deep in conversation. Once, they rode out together to a nearby meadow where wildflowers bloomed in profusion, returning with Willow's horse adorned with colorful blossoms. The townspeople watched with interest and, for the most part, approval. The schoolteacher and the sheriff made a handsome couple, and both were well respected in their roles. If some of the younger miners were disappointed that the pretty Miss Armstrong seemed spoken for, they were wise enough not to voice those complaints within earshot of the sheriff. For Willow, these Sunday afternoons became the highlight of her week. Logan brought a perspective on life in the West that helped her navigate her new surroundings, and in turn, she provided him with the intellectual conversation and connection to the wider world that he had missed. They debated politics and literature, shared memories of the East, and gradually, cautiously, revealed more of themselves to each other. She learned that he had lost his younger brother at Gettysburg, a tragedy that had profoundly shaped his post-war years. He discovered her secret passion for astronomy, nurtured by her father's telescope and scientific journals. Both admitted to occasional overwhelming homesickness for the green landscapes of their youth, so different from the stark, dramatic beauty of the Utah mountains. What neither acknowledged openly was the growing attraction between them. It manifested in lingering glances, in the way their hands sometimes brushed when passing a book or cup, in conversations that occasionally fell into charged silences. Willow found herself thinking of Logan at odd moments during her school day, wondering what he might be doing, hoping he was safe in his duties. Logan, for his part, found himself taking unnecessary rides past the schoolhouse just to catch a glimpse of her through the window as she taught. On a warm evening in late July, everything changed. Willow had stayed late at the schoolhouse, preparing for the next day's lessons. The summer session had fewer students, as many children were needed for work during the growing season, but she still maintained a rigorous schedule for those who attended. The sun was setting as she finally locked the schoolhouse door, casting long shadows across the main street. Most businesses were closing up for the day, though lights blazed from the Golden Spur, which would remain open well into the night. Willow adjusted her shawl and started toward home, her mind preoccupied with plans for teaching her older students about the Declaration of Independence. She was passing the alleyway beside the blacksmith shop when a hand suddenly clamped around her arm, yanking her into the shadows. Before she could scream, another hand covered her mouth, the smell of cheap whiskey and unwashed skin making her gag. "Remember me, schoolmarm." Charlie's voice rasped in her ear. "Been waiting for a chance to finish our conversation from the general store." Willow struggled, but the miner's grip was like iron. She could make out the shapes of his two companions from before, lurking further down the alley. "Sheriff ain't around to claim you tonight," Charlie continued, his breath hot against her face. "Rode out to investigate some trouble at the South Mine, won't be back for hours." He laughed low in his throat. "Plenty of time for us to get better acquainted." Panic shot through Willow, but she forced herself to stay calm. Her reticule hung from her wrist, the small derringer inside it tantalizingly close, if she could just reach it. Charlie spun her around to face him, keeping one hand clamped over her mouth. "Now you're gonna be real quiet and cooperative, or my friends over there are gonna get involved too. Understand?" Willow nodded, her eyes wide with feigned terror. The moment his hand relaxed slightly, she bit down hard on his palm. Charlie yelped, jerking his hand away. "You little." Willow didn't wait for him to finish. She slammed her knee upward with all her strength, connecting solidly with his groin. As he doubled over, gasping, she wrenched free of his grip and plunged her hand into her reticule, fingers closing around the small pistol. "Stay back," she commanded, pointing the derringer at Charlie's hunched form. Her voice shook, but her grip on the weapon was steady. "All of you, stay where you are." The other two miners froze, clearly not expecting their intended victim to be armed. Charlie, still doubled over in pain, glared up at her with naked hatred. "You'll regret that," he spat. "No one makes a fool of me. You've done that well enough on your own." Willow retorted, backing slowly toward the mouth of the alley. Now, I'm going to leave, and if any of you follow me, I'll shoot. I may be a schoolteacher, but my father made certain I know how to use this. She had almost reached the street when Charlie suddenly lunged forward with surprising speed. Willow pulled the trigger instinctively, the small gun's report deafeningly loud in the confined space. Charlie screamed, clutching his shoulder as blood blossomed through his dirty shirt. The sound of the gunshot brought people running from nearby buildings. Willow stood frozen, the smoking derringer still extended before her as townsfolk poured into the alley. Among them was Dr. Mason, who immediately moved to examine the wounded miner. "What happened here?" demanded Mr. Thompson, the general store owner, staring in shock at the scene. Willow's voice seemed to come from very far away. "He attacked me, they all did, they were waiting for me." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some voices sympathetic, others suspicious. Charlie, now being tended by the doctor, was loudly proclaiming his innocence. "She's lying. We was just talking, and she pulled that gun on me for no reason." "That's not true," Willow protested, but she could see doubt in some of the faces surrounding her. She was still new to Alta, still an outsider in many ways, while Charlie and his friends had been mining here since the town's founding. The crowd parted suddenly, and Logan pushed through, his expression thunderous. He took in the scene at a glance, Willow still holding the derringer, Charlie bleeding on the ground, the other two miners trying to back away unnoticed. "I thought you were at the South Mine," Willow said weakly, relief flooding through her at the sight of him. "Got back early," he replied tersely, his eyes never leaving her face. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No, but she shot me," Charlie interrupted, wincing as Dr. Mason probed his wound. "For no reason. We was just passing the time of day, Sheriff, and she goes crazy with that little gun of hers." Logan ignored him, stepping closer to Willow. Gently, he took the derringer from her trembling hand. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly, just for her ears. Willow swallowed hard. "They were waiting for me in the alley," Charlie said. "He said you were gone and they had plenty of time to." She couldn't finish the sentence. A muscle twitched in Logan's jaw. "Did he touch you?" "He grabbed me. I fought back, and when I got free, I pulled out my derringer." Her voice steadied as she continued. "I was trying to leave when he came at me again. That's when I shot him." Logan nodded once, then turned to face the crowd. "Doc, how bad is it?" Dr. Mason looked up from his examination, clean through the shoulder. "He'll live, though he won't be swinging a pickaxe for a while." "Good." Logan's voice was cold as he addressed the onlookers. Miss Armstrong was defending herself against an unprovoked attack. "These men have been warned before about harassing women in this town. She's lying." Charlie protested again. "Tell them, boys, we was just talking to her." Logan fixed the other two miners with a hard stare. "Is that right? You want to stand by that story?" The men exchanged nervous glances. Finally, the shorter one spoke up. "Charlie's been planning this for days, Sheriff. Ever since you interrupted him at the saloon, said he was going to teach both of you a lesson." "Shut up, Pete," Charlie snarled, trying to rise despite the doctor's restraining hand. "It's the truth," Pete continued, clearly deciding his own neck was worth more than loyalty to Charlie. "He knew your routine, Miss Armstrong, knew you'd be walking home alone from the school today." A low murmur ran through the crowd. Mr. Thompson stepped forward. "I heard him in the saloon last night, Sheriff, bragging about how he was gonna get even with the uppity schoolmarm and her lawman. Didn't think much of it at the time, figured it was just drunk talk." Logan's expression darkened further. "Dr. Mason, when you've patched him up, Charlie will be spending some time in my jail. As for his friends." He turned to the two miners, who now looked thoroughly cowed. "You've got until sunrise to collect your things and clear out of Alta. If I see either of you after that, you'll join Charlie behind bars." "You can't do that," the taller miner protested. "We've got claims here." "You should have thought of that before you planned to assault a woman," Logan replied evenly. "Your claims are forfeit. Consider yourselves lucky I'm not charging you as accessories." As Dr. Mason and several volunteers helped Charlie to his feet to transport him to the doctor's office, Logan turned back to Willow. The crowd was beginning to disperse, though many still cast curious glances their way. "Let me walk you home," he said softly, placing a hand under her elbow. Willow nodded, suddenly feeling the delayed shock of the encounter. Her knees felt weak, and she was grateful for Logan's steady presence as they made their way through town. Neither spoke until they reached her cabin, the familiar sight of its whitewashed walls bringing a rush of tears to Willow's eyes. Logan opened the door for her, then hesitated on the threshold. "Do you want me to stay, or I could ask Mrs. Perkins to come over?" "No," Willow said quickly, wiping at her eyes. "No, I'd rather you stayed, just for a little while, if that's all right." He followed her inside, removing his hat as Willow lit the lamp. In its warm glow, she could see dust on his clothes and fatigue in the lines of his face. "You really were at the South Mine," she observed. "You must be tired." "That doesn't matter now." He set his hat on the table and moved to the small stove. "Sit down, I'll make you some tea." Willow sank into a chair, watching as Logan competently filled the kettle and set it to boil. His movements were efficient, familiar with her small kitchen from his many Sunday visits. When the tea was ready, he brought her a steaming cup, then sat across from her. "You showed remarkable courage today," he said after she had taken a few sips. "Most women would have panicked." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But my father always said fear is useful only if it sharpens your wits, not if it paralyzes them." "Your father sounds like a wise man." Logan's eyes were gentle as they rested on her face. "I'm sorry this happened, Willow." "I should have dealt with Charlie more permanently after that first incident," she shook her head. "You couldn't have known he'd harbor such a grudge, and I'm fine, really." She set down her cup, her hands steadier now. "Thank you for believing me." "For a moment there, with everyone staring, I thought." "I will always believe you," Logan said simply, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "Always." The touch of his hand on hers sent warmth spiraling up Willow's arm. For a long moment they sat like that, connected by that simple contact, while the lamplight cast soft shadows around them. "Logan," Willow began hesitantly, "what Charlie said about teaching us both a lesson. He seemed to think there was something between us, something more than friendship." Logan's fingers tightened slightly around hers. "The whole town thinks that, Willow. Surely you've noticed the way people look at us on Sundays." "Yes, but..." She met his eyes directly. "Is there something more, I mean?" He was silent for so long that Willow began to fear she had misread everything, that the connection she felt between them existed only in her imagination. Then, with deliberate care, Logan stood and moved around the table until he was standing before her chair. Still holding her hand, he knelt down so they were at eye level. "From the moment I saw you in that saloon," he said quietly, "something changed for me. I've been alone for so long, Willow, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments. But when I look at you..." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "When I'm with you, I feel like I've found home." Tears welled in Willow's eyes at the simple honesty of his words. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I came west looking for adventure, for independence. I never expected to find someone like you." Logan's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "May I kiss you, Willow Armstrong?" Her answer was to lean forward, closing the small distance between them. His lips met hers with exquisite gentleness, a kiss that held both question and promise. Willow's eyes drifted closed as she surrendered to the sensation, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. When they finally drew apart, Logan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly uneven. "I should go," he murmured, though he made no move to release her. "Yes," Willow agreed reluctantly. "The town has enough to gossip about without adding the sheriff spending the night at the schoolteacher's cabin." Logan chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest under her palm. "They'll be talking about today's events for weeks as it is." He straightened, helping her to her feet. "Will you be all right here alone?" "Truly," Willow nodded, feeling stronger now. "I'll be fine. Charlie's in jail, his friends are leaving town, and..." She smiled up at him. "And I know you're not far away." He kissed her once more, briefly but with unmistakable tenderness before retrieving his hat. "Lock the door behind me," he instructed. "I'll come by in the morning to walk you to the school." "I'd like that," Willow replied softly. At the door, Logan turned back, his expression serious again. "Willow, I want you to know, this isn't just because of what happened today. I've felt this way for weeks now, just wasn't sure how to tell you or if you felt the same." "I know," she assured him. "I've felt it too. Every Sunday, every time we talked, every moment together. It's been leading to this." With a final smile that transformed his face in that now familiar way, Logan stepped out into the night. Willow watched until he was out of sight, then carefully locked the door as he'd instructed. Despite the evening's trauma, her heart felt curiously light. She had come to Alta seeking a new life, new experiences, and independence. What she'd found, unexpectedly but wonderfully, was something even more precious: the possibility of love with a man who saw her strength and valued her courage. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the summer sun bathing Alta in golden light. Willow had slept surprisingly well, the emotional exhaustion of the previous evening's events drawing her into deep, dreamless slumber. She rose with the sun, washing and dressing carefully in a pale blue dress that Logan had once remarked brought out the color of her eyes. True to his word, he arrived just as she finished her breakfast, knocking lightly on her door. When she opened it, the sight of him standing there, freshly shaved and in a clean shirt, brought a rush of warmth to her cheeks as memories of their kisses flooded back. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they had shared. Logan's smile was gentle. "Good morning." "How are you feeling?" "Much better," she assured him, stepping outside and locking the door behind her. "Though I expect I'll be the main topic of conversation at school today." "The whole town's talking about it," Logan confirmed, offering his arm as they began walking toward the schoolhouse. "But mostly in your favor. Everyone's impressed with how you handled yourself." Willow slipped her hand through his arm, acutely aware of the solid strength of him beside her. "And Charlie, how is he?" "Sullen but alive. Doc Mason says the wound's clean, no major damage. He'll be fit for trial when the circuit judge comes through next month." Logan glanced down at her. "You'll need to testify if you're willing." "Of course," Willow agreed without hesitation. "I won't have him threatening anyone else." They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments, nodding to the townspeople they passed, many of whom gave them knowing looks or approving smiles. It seemed their changed relationship was already common knowledge. "I've been thinking," Logan said finally, as the schoolhouse came into view. "About us, about the future." Willow's heart quickened. "Have you?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Willow, I know this is sudden. We've only known each other a short time, and after last night. I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of your vulnerability or that I expect anything because of what's happened between us." "I know that," she replied, touched by his concern. "Good." He took a deep breath. "Because what I want to say is that I care for you deeply. More than I thought possible after everything I've seen and done. And while I don't want to rush you into anything, I need you to know that my intentions are honorable, that I see a future with you if you'll have me." Willow felt tears prick at her eyes for the second time in less than a day. "Logan Zephyr, are you proposing to me?" A faint flush colored his tan cheeks. "Not exactly, not yet. I'm declaring my intentions, letting you know where my heart stands. The proposal will come when you're ready to hear it, not a moment sooner." She laughed softly, joy bubbling up inside her. "You really are a gentleman beneath that sheriff's badge, aren't you?" "I try to be," he answered seriously. "Especially with things with people that matter." Willow's expression softened. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed a quick kiss to his cheek, heedless of who might be watching. "Thank you for that, and for giving me time, but you should know." She met his eyes squarely. "My heart stands with yours, Logan." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He squeezed her hand once, then released it as they continued toward the schoolhouse, where several of Willow's students were already waiting. "I'll be back at the end of the day," Logan promised as they reached the steps, "to walk you home." "I'll look forward to it," Willow replied, her smile following him as he turned and headed back toward his office. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to Willow's life in Alta. Each morning, Logan would walk her to the schoolhouse. Each afternoon, he would be waiting when her students were dismissed. Their Sunday afternoons continued, though now they included more than conversation and shared books. There were walks by the creek where they could speak privately, picnics in the meadow where wildflowers grew, and sweet, stolen kisses when they were certain no one was watching. August brought the end of the summer school session and the arrival of the circuit judge. Charlie's trial was brief but thorough, with Willow providing clear, composed testimony about the attack. When the judge sentenced the minor to 6 months in the territorial prison for assault and attempted kidnapping, a collective sigh of relief went through the community. Alta was growing, changing from a rough mining camp to a real town, and such behavior would no longer be tolerated. As summer gave way to autumn, Logan began to take Willow on longer rides into the surrounding countryside. He showed her hidden valleys where aspen trees turned brilliant gold, secluded lakes that reflected the blue of the mountain sky, and ancient petroglyphs carved by native peoples centuries before. On these excursions, they spoke of their pasts and their hopes, discovering more layers to each other with every conversation. Willow learned that Logan had left Boston after the war not just because of restlessness, but because his fiancée had broken their engagement when he returned changed by what he had seen on the battlefield. She wanted the same carefree young lawyer she'd agreed to marry, he explained as they sat beside a mountain stream. Not a man with nightmares and scars. Her loss, Willow said simply, squeezing his hand, though I can't say I'm sorry since it brought you west. In turn, Willow shared the real reason she had volunteered for the teaching position in Utah. My parents had arranged a match for me, she admitted. The son of a family friend, very respectable, very dull. When I refused, my father threatened to cut off my allowance. So I applied for this position, partly out of genuine interest and partly to prove I could support myself. Logan chuckled at that. Stubborn independence must run in your blood, says the man who left a promising legal career to become a lawman in the wilderness, she retorted with a smile. By the time the first snow dusted the peaks above Alta, their relationship was established fact in the town. They were invited to dinners together, included as a couple in social gatherings, and generally treated as though their eventual marriage was a foregone conclusion. Neither minded this assumption, though Logan was careful never to press Willow for a formal commitment before she was ready. The opportunity came, unexpectedly, during the town's Christmas celebration. Alta had grown substantially over the past months, with new businesses opening and more families settling in. The community hall, built that summer, was festooned with pine boughs and ribbons, a massive tree decorated with candles and handmade ornaments dominating one end of the room. Willow, dressed in a deep red gown she had ordered from Salt Lake City, moved among her students and their parents, accepting compliments on the children's performance of Christmas recitations. Logan watched her from across the room, struck anew by her grace and the natural way she had become part of the fabric of Alta. When she glanced up and caught his eye, her smile was like a beacon calling him home. Later, as the celebration wound down and couples began to dance to the music of a small ensemble, Logan took Willow's hand and led her outside. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead with a brilliance unique to mountain winters. Their breath formed small clouds in the frosty air as they stood on the porch of the community hall. Cold? Logan asked, noticing Willow's slight shiver. A little, she admitted, but it's beautiful out here. He slipped off his coat and placed it around her shoulders, the warmth of his body lingering in the fabric. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his vest pocket. A Christmas gift. Willow's eyes widened as he withdrew a small velvet box. Logan. I know we agreed to exchange gifts tomorrow, he continued, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. But this one? Well, I wanted to give it to you privately. With careful fingers, he opened the box to reveal a ring, a single pearl set in gold with tiny diamonds on either side. It was elegant without being ostentatious, exactly the sort of thing Willow would have chosen for herself. It was my mother's, Logan explained softly. The only thing of hers I kept when I left Boston. Willow stared at the ring, then up at his face, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must hear it. "Logan, are you?" He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Willow Armstrong, from the moment you appeared in my life, everything changed. You brought light and laughter back into my world. You remind me daily of the good in people, of the reason I became a lawman in the first place." He took a deep breath. "I love you, with everything I am. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Willow's eyes, freezing on her lashes in the cold air. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Logan. Yes, I'll marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms. The kiss they shared was tender at first, then deepened as Willow wound her arms around his neck, heedless of who might see them from the windows of the hall. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Logan rested his forehead against hers. "I thought you might want more time," he admitted. "It's only been a few months." "I've known since that night in my cabin," Willow replied, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, "when you knelt before me and told me you'd found home, because that's what you are to me, Logan. Home isn't Boston anymore or even Alta, it's wherever you are." They returned to the celebration hand in hand, the pearl ring glinting in the candlelight. News of their engagement spread through the hall like wildfire, resulting in congratulations, toasts, and more than a few knowing looks from those who had predicted this outcome from the start. As they danced together later, surrounded by the warmth of community and the promise of their future, Willow thought back to that first night in the saloon. How terrified she had been, cornered by Charlie and his friends. How Logan had appeared like some avenging angel, claiming her with those simple words, "She's with me." He had been right, though neither of them had known it then. She was with him, bound by something stronger than fear or circumstance. Bound by love, by choice, by the shared dream of building something lasting in this wild, beautiful corner of the world. Willow and Logan were married on a bright spring day in April 1877, with the mountains still capped in snow but the valley bursting with new growth. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, held in the church where they had first caught each other's eyes across the congregation. Willow wore a gown of ivory silk, ordered from San Francisco, with her mother's lace veil and a bouquet of wildflowers gathered by her students. Logan, resplendent in a new black suit, waited for her at the altar with an expression of such naked joy that several of the town's matrons were moved to tears before the ceremony even began. When Willow reached him, taking his hands in hers, it seemed to both that they had been moving toward this moment from their very first meeting. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to love and cherish, to support and protect, to build a life worthy of the gift they had found in each other. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Logan's kiss was both tender and passionate, a perfect balance that matched the man himself. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by every household in Alta, music from local musicians, and dancing under lanterns strung across the town square. Even Mrs. Perkins, now in her 60s, was persuaded to demonstrate a Virginia reel from her youth, much to the delight of the crowd. As the festivities continued around them, Logan drew Willow away for a moment of privacy near the creek where they had spent so many Sunday afternoons. "Happy, Mrs. Zephyr?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as she leaned back against his chest. "Completely," she assured him, turning in his embrace to face him. "Though I'll admit to some curiosity about our new home, you've been very mysterious about it." Logan's smile was enigmatic. "It's not far. We can ride out to see it tomorrow if you like." Willow raised an eyebrow. "I'd rather see it tonight, husband. After all, that's where we'll be spending our wedding night, isn't it?" A flicker of heat passed through Logan's eyes at her boldness. "If that's what you want," he agreed, his voice dropping to a register that sent shivers down her spine. They made their excuses shortly after, amid knowing smiles and good-natured teasing from the townspeople. Logan had arranged for a buggy rather than horseback, allowing Willow to keep her wedding gown pristine as they set out from Alta, following a well-maintained road that wound into the foothills east of town. After about 20 minutes' drive, they crested a small rise, and Willow gasped at what lay before them. A house stood in a natural clearing surrounded by pine trees, with a stream running nearby and a view of the mountains beyond. It was larger than the typical cabin, constructed of squared logs with a generous porch wrapping around two sides. Lamplight glowed welcomingly from the windows, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. "Logan, it's beautiful," Willow breathed as he helped her from the buggy. "When did you? How?" "I started building it last fall," he explained, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Had some help from friends in town, we kept it quiet as a surprise. Do you truly like it?" "I love it," she assured him, accepting his arm as they walked toward the house. "Our own home, away from town but not too far, it's perfect." Logan paused at the front door, his expression suddenly serious. "There's something else," he said, taking both her hands in his. "I've been offered a position as a federal marshal again. It would mean traveling sometimes, but also a higher salary, more authority to handle the growing region's needs. I wanted to discuss it with you before deciding." Willow squeezed his hands. "Is it what you want?" "The work, yes," he admitted. "The travel, less so now that I have you. But I think I could do some good in that role." "Then you should accept," Willow said without hesitation. "I knew who you were when I fell in love with you, Logan, a man dedicated to justice and protecting others. I would never ask you to be less than that." Relief and love mingled in his eyes. "We'll talk more about it," he promised. "For now." A slow smile spread across his face as he swept her into his arms, causing her to laugh in surprise. "I believe there's a tradition about carrying one's bride across the threshold." The interior of the house was as thoughtfully designed as the exterior, with a spacious main room featuring a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and bookshelves already half filled with volumes. A kitchen area occupied one end of the room, with a modern cook stove and cupboards stocked with essentials. But it was what Logan showed her next that brought tears to Willow's eyes. A small room off the main living area had been set up as a study, with a desk by the window overlooking the mountains and more bookshelves. "I thought you might want a place to prepare your lessons," Logan explained, watching her reaction carefully. "Or perhaps write. You've mentioned enjoying poetry." Willow turned to him, overwhelmed by the consideration this represented. "You thought of everything," she said softly. "This house, it's not just a building, it's a home you've created for us." "For our future," Logan corrected gently, drawing her into his arms. "For the family we might have someday, if you want that." "I do," Willow assured him, resting her head against his chest. "Very much." Later, much later, as moonlight streamed through the bedroom window and Willow lay in the circle of Logan's arms, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the sheltered existence of Boston society to a teaching position in a mining town, from a frightening encounter in a saloon to falling in love with the man who had come to her rescue. "What are you thinking?" Logan murmured, his voice drowsy with contentment. Willow smiled in the darkness, tracing lazy patterns on his bare chest. "About how glad I am that I was trapped in that saloon, that you walked in and claimed me." He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly under her ear. "I think it was the other way around, love. You claimed me, heart and soul, the moment you stood up to those miners with your head held high." She shifted to look into his face, silver in the moonlight. "Perhaps we claimed each other," she suggested. "Two people who needed to find their way west before they could find each other." Logan's kiss was an eloquent response, tender and passionate at once, a perfect emblem of the love they had found in the most unexpected of places. And as Willow surrendered to the rising tide of desire between them, she knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever adventures lay ahead, whatever challenges or joys their life together might bring, they would face them, as they had faced everything since that first night. Together, bound by a love that had begun with courage and grown into something unbreakable. The years that followed brought changes to Alta and to the Zephyr's lives. Logan accepted the marshal's position, which occasionally took him away from home but allowed him to make a real difference in the territory's development. Willow continued teaching until the spring of 1879, when the birth of their first child, a son they named William, after Willow's father prompted her to step back from her formal role at the school, though she remained involved in Alta's educational development. William was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, in 1881, and another brother, James, in 1883. The house in the foothills expanded with their family, with Logan adding rooms and enlarging the porch where they spent summer evenings watching their children play in the yard while the sun set over the mountains. Alta grew as well, evolving from a mining town to a more established community as the railroad arrived and businesses diversified. By 1885, it boasted a proper school building with 3 teachers, a bank, a newspaper, and even a small hotel for travelers. Charlie, upon his release from prison, had wisely chosen to seek his fortune elsewhere, and Alta's reputation as a law-abiding town grew under Logan's continued influence. Through it all, Logan and Willow's partnership remained the bedrock of their existence. They faced hardships: a difficult winter when William fell ill with pneumonia, financial strain during a mining downturn, the loss of Willow's father and later her mother, but they weathered each storm together, emerging stronger for the challenges they overcame. They celebrated joys as well: children's first steps and words, community achievements, professional successes. When Logan was offered a judgeship in 1890, allowing him to remain in Alta permanently, they held a celebration that rivaled their wedding reception for enthusiasm and community participation. As their children grew, so did the legend of how their parents had met. The story of the schoolteacher trapped in the saloon and the sheriff who claimed her became family lore, embellished with each telling until Logan jokingly complained that he barely recognized himself in the heroic figure his children described. "You've always been a hero to me," Willow would remind him, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. From that very first night. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1897, with their children nearly grown and Alta transformed into a prosperous town of over 2,000 souls, Logan and Willow returned to the Golden Spur, now a respectable hotel and restaurant rather than a rowdy saloon. They dined at the best table, served by the grandson of old Hank Thompson, who had retired to Salt Lake City years before. After dinner, they walked through the town that had been their home for so long, noting the changes and remembering what had been. The schoolhouse where Willow had taught was now the town library, named in her honor for her years of service to education. The jail where Logan had begun his law career in Alta was now a historical exhibit, the town having built a more modern facility on its outskirts. "Do you ever regret it?" Logan asked as they strolled arm in arm beneath the gaslights that had replaced the old oil lamps. "Coming west, staying in Alta, we could have returned to Boston once we had means." Willow stopped, turning to face her husband. At 43, she was still beautiful, her chestnut hair now touched with silver, her eyes as bright and intelligent as the day they'd met. "Never," she said firmly, "not for a single moment. This is where we built our life, our family. This is where I found myself and you." "How could I regret that?" Logan smiled, the expression transforming his face just as it had all those years ago. Judge Zephyr was a respected figure throughout the territory now, known for his fairness and integrity, but to Willow, he would always be the sheriff who had walked into a saloon and changed her life with 4 simple words. "I love you, Willow Zephyr," he said, bending to kiss her beneath the stars that shone as brightly as they had on their first night together. "More with each passing day, and I love you," she replied, her arms encircling his waist. "My sheriff, my judge, my heart." As they walked home to the house that had sheltered their family for 2 decades, Willow reflected that life rarely follows the paths we expect. She had come west seeking adventure and independence, never imagining she would find a love that would define her life. Logan had sought purpose and a fresh start, not daring to hope for a partner who would see him truly see him and love him completely. Yet here they were, 20 years later, still walking side by side through a town that had watched their love story unfold from that first dramatic night. From a schoolteacher trapped by drunk men in a saloon and a cowboy sheriff who claimed her with quiet authority, they had built something rare and precious. A life filled with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of challenges met together. And as they reached their home, where light spilled welcomingly from the windows and the sounds of their children's laughter drifted through the evening air, both knew with absolute certainty that whatever adventures lay ahead in the years to come, they would face them as they had faced everything since that fateful evening in the Golden Spur Saloon together, bound by a love that had begun with courage and grown into something unbreakable. In the end, that was the true legacy of their Wild West love story. Not the drama of their first meeting or the challenges they had overcome, but the enduring partnership they had forged day by day, year by year, built on respect, passion, and unwavering devotion. It was a legacy that would outlive them, passed down through their children and grandchildren, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and build futures brighter than either could have imagined alone. And it had all begun with those simple words, spoken in a moment of danger and destiny. "She's with me."